Hey everyone, this is Mr. Dunkel. I'm going to show you some things in Excel today, and I'm going to separate them into some smaller videos so it's not just one really long one. So let's break it down and kind of get into Excel, as this is a program you're going to use a lot during high school. So I'm going to jump into Excel 2013. This is something you should have on your computers, but also remember that if you log into your email and you go to OneDrive, you can also create Excel documents through OneDrive. Now, when you're on a computer though and you pull up Excel, you're going to notice that you get, do you want to do a blank workbook, or do you want to use a template that's already created for you? And bear in mind, sometimes this is very, very helpful, because that way you're not having to create everything from scratch. And here's some suggested searches that you can, so, oh, I want a calendar, and it'll show you some calendars that are already made. But let's say, for instance, you want to make a roster in Excel for your sports team that you're on. You can type in roster, and here's sports team roster. And if you click on it, it'll just show you a preview of what it's going to look like. And what's nice is everything's already laid out for you. You just have to go and change names, and everything's good to go. Now, for this one, we're just going to go back and we're just going to do a blank workbook. And I want to just talk about some of the basics with Excel to know about to get started, and then some of the other videos will actually make some charts. The thing to know about Excel is that first off, think of Excel like a notebook. And so within a notebook, if you have a spiral bound notebook, or you can have multiple pages within that notebook, and that's the way Excel works. And so those pages are down here at the bottom. Like right now we have one page in our workbook, and it says sheet 1, and I can click on this actually, and I can change it. So I could call this science experiment, or whatever you want to, and click off. And now this is letting me know page 1 is science experiment. And if I need another page, if I want to do more data and have another chart, not have it all get clustered together, I can just click on this little plus symbol. Now I have sheet 2, and I can double click in there, and I can put in another title that makes sense to me, research data. And so you can continue adding page after page after page, and what's great is it's going to save all of this as just one single file. So it's a good way to keep things organized if you're doing a big project like a science fair project and you have different graphs and tables and things of that nature. So a couple things to know as well is basically how Excel is laid out. It's laid out in a series of columns like A, B, C, D, E. These are all called columns, and you can click on any one of them, it'll select the whole column, as well as rows, which is your 1, 2, 3, 4. And so oftentimes you'll have a teacher that may tell you, I want you to go to column, or I want you to go to B2, and they're referring to column B, row 2, and they say this is where I want you to type your data starting at B2. And so think of it like Battleship, B2, C3, you sunk my battleship kind of thing. And so that's the basic layout. Everything else is going to be similar to probably what you're used to in Word. The home screen has your font and paragraph options as far as you want to center things, you want to bold it. Insert tab at the top is where we're going to go to actually make our graphs and charts, and we'll talk about that in another video. Page layout is also one that's a little helpful, because Excel makes the assumption that you are creating this to just be seen online, but on occasion you're going to want to print them. And so if you're printing them, you'll want to come to the page layout, because there are some things here that are important. So for instance, margins. You can set, how wide of a margin do you want when you print it out, so you can do some things to give yourself a little bit more room. Orientation is very important. Orientation is telling the printer whether to print everything vertically in portrait mode, which they call it portrait because it's vertical, like a class picture, a portrait, or landscape mode, which is going to be where you turn your paper sideways. And in landscape mode, they call it that because it's similar to a painting of a landscape, like of mountains or something like that. You'd turn your canvas sideways. So that's real important to kind of consider if you're going to have your information going across the top, a whole bunch of information here, you may want to be in portrait mode. If most of your information is going to be going vertically, then you'd want to be in portrait mode. Size, you really shouldn't have to mess with, but you may want to double check just to make sure letter is what you're going to be printing on most of the time. Now, one other thing that's under the page layout section that's important is this under here with grid lines. When you're working in Excel, you can see all of these lines here that's creating this grid pattern. However, if we went to print, like if I had data here and I go to print, what you'll notice is I don't see those grid lines now. Now, a lot of times people want the grid lines. It just kind of helps to make things a little bit easier to view. So in that case, you can click on the print and go here to print. Now you'll see in the preview, I see the grid lines of what I have. If for some reason you don't have it set up and you forget there, you can also go to page setup. And if you go to page setup, you can go to sheet, and there's a check for grid lines here as well. So two different ways we can get to that. So I'm going to leave print grid lines selected, and you'll notice that now I have these little dashed lines, and what that's telling me is this is where the page ends. So if I'm putting a lot of stuff in row 1, going across in row 1, and I go over here, that means this is not going to be on the printed page. This will be on page 2. This is page 1, that type of thing there. So it's helpful to keep that in mind when you're entering your data, kind of knowing where your boundaries and your barriers are. Everything else, formulas, we'll try to talk about at a later part. Formulas can be pretty complex, but they're really neat because you can have Excel do a lot of the work for you. Data probably won't really get into that much. Same thing with review. You can spell check and things like that like you would in Word. And then view is just simply what type of view. I really wouldn't mess with any of these. You're probably not going to need to do any of that. So basically just focus on home, insert page layout. Know that you can change your tabs here at the bottom. Know the difference between columns and rows. And in the next video, we will go ahead and set up some data and try making a graph.